You know what's strange about spectacled bears? They live where bears shouldn't work. Most bears you think cold, salmon rivers, thick forests up north, places where being large and fuzzy makes sense. These ones climb into cloud forest in the Andes. Wet, steep, thin air, and they just exist there. Like it's nothing. The fur helps, obviously, but not the way you'd think. It's shorter than what a grizzly has. Denser, though. When it rains, and it rains constantly up there, the water doesn't really soak in. It beads off. You'd expect them to get cold, soaked through on a ridge at 3,000 meters. They don't. The underlayer holds heat close to the skin even when the surface is damp. Which matters because they spend a lot of time doing something that looks completely wrong for a bear. They climb. Not like, oh, a bear can climb if it wants to. They live in trees, build platforms out of broken branches, sleep up there, eat up there, sometimes 30, 40 feet off the ground. The claws are long, curved, but also not super thick. If you compare them to a brown bear's claws, which are basically shovels, these are thinner, more precise. They hook into bark without snapping, which sounds minor until you realize they're hauling 200 pounds vertically on a regular basis. The shoulders matter too. They're not as bulky as other bears, more compact. The range of motion is wider. You see it when they're pulling themselves up. They can rotate the front limbs in ways that look almost awkward, but it works. It keeps the weight distributed while they're reaching for the next hold. This is what happens when a lineage ends up somewhere specific and just stays there long enough that the body reorganizes around it. And they do this in fog. You'd think vision would be the thing keeping them oriented. It's not. The eyesight's fine, but they're not relying on it. They're using smell. Constantly. The nose is wet, broad, picks up scent trails even in saturated air. Which is good because half the time they're moving through clouds. They eat a lot of plants. Way more than most bears. Bromeliads, palm hearts, orchid bulbs, fruit when it's around. They'll spend hours pulling apart a bromeliad to get at the soft core. It's not particularly efficient. The calories aren't amazing. But they do it anyway because the other option is hunting. And hunting takes more energy than it's usually worth at that altitude. Sometimes they eat meat. Deer, if they can catch one. Cattle, if they wander into the wrong spot. But it's not the plan. It's opportunistic. The digestive system handles all of it. Plant-heavy diet, occasional protein. The gut's longer than a pure carnivore's. Breaks down cellulose better? Not as well as a cow, obviously. But enough that they can survive on vegetation for months without a problem. Here's the thing about their teeth. The molars are flat, wide, built for grinding. The canines are still there, they're bears, but they're smaller than you'd expect. Less about tearing, more about gripping. If they do take down something large, they're not built to process it quickly. They just take their time. The jaw strength's still significant. Has to be if you're cracking open palm nuts that are basically wooden shells. But it's not the crushing bite force of a polar bear. It's more about sustained pressure, endurance over power. Every one of these pieces, claws, shoulders, teeth, gut, they didn't show up together. They accumulated, one at a time. And the ones that made living in steep, wet forests slightly less difficult. Those stuck around. The ones that didn't. They're also smaller than most bears. Males maybe 250 pounds. Females closer to 150. Which doesn't sound small until you remember that a grizzly can push 800, but the size works. Less weight to haul up a tree, less food needed per day, more flexibility in where they can go, smaller body, less muscle mass to fuel, which matters when you're eating plants that aren't calorie dense. The math wouldn't work if they were bigger. They'd starve. So the size isn't a compromise, it's the only configuration that functions here. The chest mark is what gets them the name. That pale pattern across the face and throat. Looks like glasses, kind of. It's different on every individual. No two patterns match exactly, which is useful if you're trying to identify them, but it's not clear what the pattern actually does for the bear. Might be recognition between individuals. Might be nothing. It's stuck around either way. They don't den like northern bears, no hibernation. The temperature doesn't drop enough to make it necessary. Food availability shifts, but it doesn't disappear, so they stay active year-round, which means the metabolism doesn't have to do that whole shutdown and restart thing. It just runs. Steadier. Less dramatic. That's another thing that works only because they're here. Try to hibernate in a cloud forest and you'd wake up in the middle of it anyway because the seasons don't signal the same way. So the biology just runs through it. No pause. Reproduction's slow. Females don't breed every year. Usually every 2 or 3. Cubs stay with the mother for a long time. Over a year, sometimes closer to 2. She's teaching them what's edible, where to climb, how to read the terrain. It's a long investment. The survival rate isn't great. A lot of cubs don't make it. Predation sometimes. Jaguars will take a young bear if they get the chance. But more often it's just resource availability. If the mother can't find enough food, the cub doesn't grow fast enough, that's it. The population's not huge. Maybe a few thousand left, scattered across 6 countries. Habitat loss is the main thing. Logging, agriculture. The cloud forests get cleared for cattle ranching, and suddenly there's no place for a bear that needs trees and altitude and very specific kinds of plants. They're not aggressive toward people generally. They avoid contact. Which makes sense. Humans haven't been great for them. But every now and then one gets into crops or livestock, and that becomes a problem. For the bear, mostly. What's interesting is how specific their niche is. They're not generalists, not really. They look adaptable because they eat a lot of different things. But all of those things exist in a very particular kind of environment. Take that away, and there's no backup plan. No migration to a different biome. They just don't have anywhere else to go. The climbing, the diet, the fur, the size, it all works together in a way that only makes sense at altitude. In those forests, nowhere else. This is what tight fit looks like. Everything lines up with the environment so precisely that the animal and the place are basically locked together. You can't pull them apart. The bear doesn't function somewhere else. Somewhere else doesn't support the bear. And they've been doing this for a long time. Long enough that the species is distinct from every other bear. They split off early, took a different path, wandered into mountains, stayed. And every generation, the ones that handled the wet and the cold and the vertical just slightly better, those were the ones that bred. The ones that didn't. No decision, no plan. Just filter, repeat, for thousands of years. And what you end up with is something that looks designed for the Andes but wasn't. It was just sanded down by the Andes until everything that didn't fit was gone. That's the whole trick, really. Survival isn't about being perfect. It's about being good enough in one specific place for long enough that nothing wipes you out. And somehow, in those cold, foggy forests where the air is thin and the trees never dry, that's exactly what happened.